Thank you, Mr. Gohmert. Let's see here. Mr. Jordan.
Thank the chairman. Mr. Whitaker, why did Rod Rosenstein send a memo to Bob Mueller on August 2nd, 2017 concerning the scope of the special counsel investigation?
Congressman, thank you for that question, and I know this is of a great interest to you, and I hope we can have a discussion about this today. The special counsel regulations require a scoping of the special counsel's investigation that identifies the subject and the targets of the investigation. So I am certain that it would have identified the scope of the investigation pursuant to the special counsel's.
Well, my question is not what, I'll get to that. My question is why, because it was 2.5 months after the special counsel was formed. So let's go back to the beginning document, which you told the chairman earlier you're completely briefed on the special counsel's investigation. I want to go, it's just a one-page document. Order number 3915-2017 says this, Mr. Whitaker, the special counsel is authorized to conduct the investigation, including any matters that arose or may arise directly from the investigation. That's pretty broad. Do you agree?
Yeah, and in my experience, it's consistent with other appointments of special counsels.
That's fine. I think it's maybe too broad, but it's as broad as you can get. One-page order, go do your investigation, and anything that arises out of it, you can investigate as well. But then 2.5 months later, we get this 3-page memo from Rod Rosenstein, Acting Attorney General, to Robert Mueller, Special Counsel. Title says, Scope of the Investigation, Definition of Authority. This is what confuses me, because in this memo that only Mr. Mueller, and my guess is you and Mr. Rosenstein and a few people at the Justice Department have seen, most of it's blacked out. In this memo, it says this: the following allegations were within the scope of the investigation at the time of your appointment and are within the scope of the order. Well, if that's true, why do you have to say it? If you could do it all along, why do you have to put it in a memo?
Congressman Jordan, first of all, I was, because of General Sessions' recusal from the special counsel's investigation, I was also recused from that investigation. And so I was not.
I'm not asking that. I'm asking, you said you were fully briefed. The chairman asked you that.
You're asking me why at the time Rod Rosenstein.
I'm asking you why 2.5 months after the broadest order you can have, why did Rod Rosenstein say, hey, you could do this all along, but now I'm putting it in a memo? And I'll tell you what really troubles me, Mr. Whitaker, is right after that statement, the following allegations were within the scope of the investigation at the time of your appointment and are within the scope of the order. Right after that, you know what? You know what happens? Everything's redacted. Look at this. The whole darn thing. So if you could do it all along, and you have to send a memo to them 2.5 months later, and then you redact everything after it. You know what's under the redactions, Mr. Whitaker?
I do, sir.
You do. Are there names under the redactions, Mr. Whitaker?
In my experience with investigations generally, you would not have a public document identify targets or subject matter of an investigation, especially if someone is not ultimately charged with a crime.
Let me frame it this way. Did Rod Rosenstein give the special counsel the authority to investigate specific Americans?
Congressman, Mr. Rosenstein, acting as the Attorney General because of Mr. Sessions' recusal, gave authorization and jurisdiction to the special counsel. And so, yes, under the special counsel regulations, that's the whole purpose of the special counsel.
So I want to make, you said yes. So there are specific names 2.5 months into the investigation that Rod Rosenstein gave the special counsel specific American names to go investigate.
Congressman, as you know,
if that's the case, then it's, well, I hope you, I want to know yes or no.
As you know, this is the subject of an ongoing investigation. And I spoke to you generally about investigation.
But I'm asking you a specific, or let me ask it this way. Can you give us assurances that there are not specific names under this 70% redacted memo that, that Rod Rosenstein sent to the special counsel?
Congressman Jordan, I know this is.
And you know why I'm asking this, Mr. Attorney General? Because in this country, we don't investigate people, we investigate crimes. And if there are specific American citizens' names in this redacted, and I asked Mr. Rosenstein to see this, and he got all mad and huffy with me in his office and wouldn't show it to me. But I think the American people, if this alters, changes, and names specific Americans, the scope of the investigation of the special counsel, Don't you think it's appropriate for the American citizens to know the full parameters of an investigation into the guy they made president of the United States?
Congressman, let me be very specific about this, because you are right. We investigate crimes, not individuals.
And that's why I'm asking the question. I would like a yes or no answer. Are there names mentioned under this redacted portion of this memo?
On that, as I mentioned before, that memo props up a confidential investigation, as is every Department of Justice.
Simple question, Mr. Whitaker. Are there names, specific American names mentioned in this redacted, 70% redacted memo that happens 2.5 months after the special counsel gets his order to start his investigation, where he was given the broadest latitude you can possibly have?
Time of the gentleman has expired. The witness may answer the question.
I would just refer the Congressman to the general practice of the Department of Justice, that we investigate crimes and not individuals.
Mr. Cohen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Attorney General, the Inspector General of the GSA have a rather scathing report on the GSA's decision not to address significant issues concerning the government's post office and its lease to the Trump family concerning the emoluments clause. And it was said that GSA attorneys said they did not refer the matter to OLC, but a senior attorney told the IG that the OLC, Office of Legal Counsel, knew about the old post office lease and it was up to them to do something. Are you aware of anything the Justice Department did to look into violations of emoluments clause at the Trump hotel?
Congressman, the emoluments clause, as it relates to the Trump hotel, is the subject of several ongoing litigation matters.
Right.
And so while I can acknowledge that I am aware of the, not only of the situation you described, but generally the litigation surrounding the emoluments clause, as the acting attorney general sitting here today, I'm unable to talk specifically about those cases.
You can't say if there are any memos from the Office of Legal Counsel regarding emoluments clause violations and limitations?
Congressman, as I sit here today, the emoluments clause, as it relates to the Trump organization, especially the hotel in Washington, D.C., is the subject of ongoing litigation.
And the Justice Department's helping to represent the president in those suits, is he not? Is that appropriate when it's a violation of him making personal monies out of the Trump hotel and being charged with violations of the emoluments clause by not reporting it to the Congress as he's supposed to by the Constitution? Shouldn't he have his personal lawyers and not Justice Department lawyers represent him for this nefarious conduct?
Congressman, I can understand that this is an important issue to you, but as it relates to the emoluments clause and the Department of Justice defense of the President of the United States, it is well within our purpose to be involved in that case.
You said that if the special counsel's investigation looked into President Trump's finances, it'd be crossing a red line. You said that, I think, in a television interview. The Attorney General has made clear that Mr. Rosenstein told the special counsel he could go into any matters that arose or may arise directly from the investigation. If matters arose from the investigation, directly or indirectly, that the Trump family owed lots of money to Russian oligarchs and people real close to Putin, and that affected the actions that they took as the President of the United States on behalf of the United States of America, would you agree that that was not crossing a red line, but in fact was a red line from Moscow that we need to look into?
Congressman, when I made that statement, I was a private citizen and had no publicly available information. I only had publicly available information. And so I made that as a commentator and not as the acting Attorney General of the United States. I am very familiar with the responsibilities of my office as acting Attorney General, and we make our decisions based on the law and the facts on a case-by-case basis.
So that's no longer your opinion? It's not crossing a red line for him to look into the finances if they might have interfered with the objective judgment of the president concerning his duty of trust to the United States of America and not to his personal financial interest or his family's.
Congressman, as I mentioned earlier, at the Department of Justice, and as long as I'm acting Attorney General, we're going to follow the law and the facts wherever they may lead, and we're going to do our jobs with fidelity.
Thank you, sir. Let me ask you this. There's been a conviction in the special counsel investigation of Mr. Manafort. Jury trial, conviction. There have been guilty pleas from Flynn, Manafort, Gates, Papadopoulos, and Michael Cohen, and dozens of indictments, including 13 Russian nationals, 3 Russian companies, and Roger Stone. Would you say the special counsel's investigation is a witch hunt? Are you overseeing a witch hunt?
Congressman, as I've mentioned previously, the special counsel's investigation is an ongoing investigation, and so I think it would be inappropriate for me to...
But you wouldn't oversee a witch hunt, would you? You'd stop a witch hunt, wouldn't you?
Congressman, it would be inappropriate for me to talk about an ongoing investigation.
You said that you're not interfering with the special counsel's investigation. Have you denied him any funds he's requested at all?
Congressman, I can tell this is an important issue for you, but
It's an important issue for the American public and for the whole world.
Congressman, to answer your question directly, I have not denied any funds to the special counsel's investigation.
Have you denied him the opportunity to go any areas where he wanted to investigate or any matters of investigation?
Congressman, as I previously testified, I have not interfered with the special counsel's investigation.
I yield back the balance of my time.
I thank the gentleman, Mr. Gohmert.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Acting Attorney General, thank you for being here today.
It's good to see you again, Congressman.
I'm amazed that you would be coming since your successor is going to apparently be confirmed next week, and you'll no longer be acting director. So I don't know what kind of suicide wish you had or whatever, but it's good to see you. One thing I wanted to hit first was a statement that you had made, and I want to confirm that these are your words. And I quote, "There is no doubt in the law enforcement community that the vast majority of the illegal drugs in this country is coming over our southern border, a pattern that is true for all crimes generally, and there is no doubt that criminals and cartels seek to exploit weaknesses in our southern border." Are those your words?
While I don't know which speech or statement you're quoting, it sounds like something I would have said, yes.
Yeah. And you wouldn't have said that if you didn't believe that, correct?
Oh, I believe what you're saying. The drugs and the general illegality that's pouring in through our southern border is having a negative effect on our country.
Now, I want to get to this issue of career officials, since colleagues on the other side of the aisle have made such a big deal about it, that you have not, they accuse you of not following the advice of career officials. Do you know the backgrounds of the people that are working directly under you and directly under Rod Rosenstein?
Congressman, I sit on top of an organization that has 115,000
I'm talking about the people
employees.
directly to you and directly to Deputy Rosenstein.
I am familiar with the people that report to both of us, yes.
Yeah, because
Although I will tell you, I think Rod Rosenstein as Deputy Attorney General has over 100 direct reports as Deputy Attorney General.
Well, and that was something I recommended to Attorney General Sessions, that he needed to reorganize and have some of those people reporting directly to him. But one of the mistakes, I think my dear friend Jeff Sessions, for whom I have immense respect, one of the mistakes that I saw him making, he was listening to people who loved Sally Yates, loved her efforts to disrupt anything that President Trump tried to do. They loved what President Obama did through the Justice Department. And in fact, I had informed Jeff that that his contact at with the NSC was sitting on his notices, so either developed conflicts or wasn't properly prepared, and that was Tashina Gahar. And she reported directly to Rosenstein. The AG should have somebody, the liaison with the NSC should report directly to the AG and not go through Rod Rosenstein, and especially when they are setting the Attorney General up to be harmed. But this, and then Anthony Ferranti, I know currently, apparently he's the Senior Managing Director of FTI Consulting. He was another one that some considered a career position at the DOJ. Let's see, he had Jordan Kelly there. She's currently Director of Cybersecurity Policy and Incident Response at the NSC, the White House. there were reports that she met routinely with the Mueller investigators. You know, between these people who, like Tashina Gahar, just thought Yates was wonderful, I would hope that wisdom in you as acting director, wisdom in the incoming Attorney General will be to look at the backgrounds, look at the people who are political hacks, and figure out, oh, they're giving me advice on this. This is not for my well-being. This is to hurt the President of the United States. And I know you may just have another week, but I would encourage you that as people make a big deal about career, look beyond career, look where their loyalties are, because even though they may be in a career position, if their loyalties are not to the Attorney General and not to the President of the United States and are more political than they are constitutional, disregard what they say.
Time of the gentleman has expired. Mr. Johnson.
Thank you, General Whitaker. Do you agree with the President's statement that the Russia investigation is a witch hunt?
As I mentioned previously, Congressman, I think it would be inappropriate for me to comment about an ongoing investigation.
Well, you commented about the Roger Stone investigation, which is ongoing, did you not?
Congressman, just to be clear about
You
this.
did comment on that. I mean, we heard you comment on the Roger Stone investigation. Why would you comment on the Roger Stone investigation, but you are reluctant to answer our questions about the Mueller investigation?
Well, that's a good question, Congressman. And my comments about the Roger Stone investigation were merely to acknowledge that I was aware that CNN had appeared to receive or was,
Well, you
at the
don't know whether or not the
location.
CNN reporter was camped out with no advanced knowledge, or whether or not he was tipped off or not. Isn't that a
Congressman,
fact?
that is true, but I'm very
Right, well, let me
concerned
move on.
that
Let me move.
operation
Hold
by
on,
the
sir.
FBI
I'm
is-
controlling the time. Let me move on. I'd like to take a moment to better understand your decision not to recuse yourself from the supervision of the special counsel's investigation. Isn't it a fact, sir, that you received your final ethics guidance on this matter on December 19th, 2018?
I appreciate this question, and I'm glad this is an
It's a pretty
opportunity for me
direct
to address
question.
this.
Did you receive your final guidance on that question
As
on
you know,
December 19th?
we have communicated with Congress the entire process that I went through to address any recusal questions that I might have, and I had no conflict of interest. I had
Well,
no
let me just
financial-
ask you, I understand you take that position, but my simple question is, isn't it a fact that you received your final ethics guidance on that question on December 19th, 2018?
Congressman, we laid out very explicitly the process that we went through, and ultimately the decision whether or not to recuse was my decision.
Mr. Whitaker,
That decision,
you were asked a
very
direct,
comfortable with that decision.
Mr. Whitaker, you were asked a direct question, and it's getting a little tiresome hearing you stall and wasting the member's time. The member only has 5 minutes. He asked you a specific question. Did you last receive advice on that on December 18th? The answer ought to be yes or no, or some other date, or I don't remember. But we don't need a speech. The gentleman may repeat.
Chairman.
No, the gentleman may repeat
No,
his
Mr.
question.
Chairman, I mean, if we're going to counsel the witness and act as his attorney on how he should answer, are you answering the question or is there a witness answering the question?
I'm
It's a
asking
yes
the
or
witness
no.
not to stall.
And we have endured that many times here when he's trying to answer the
Gentlemen-
question in the way that he is asked. It's-
Point of order. Point of order.
The gentleman is out of order. Mr. Johnson has the floor.
And I'd like to
Your
have
time will
my-
be restored.
Thank you, sir. Sir, isn't it a fact that career officials at DOJ recommended to you that you recuse yourself to avoid an appearance of a conflict of interest or bias? That was the guidance that you got from career DOJ officials about your participation or oversight of the Mueller investigation. Isn't that correct?
Congressman, I made my recusal decision by myself.
But there
after
were
consulting
career
with
DOJ officials who advised you that you should not touch that investigation. Isn't that correct?
Congressman.
Yes or no?
I consulted with career ethics officials. I consulted with my senior staff. I consulted with the Office of Legal Counsel. It was my decision to make. I decided not to recuse. I'm happy to walk through the step-by-step advice that I received.
There were
but I consulted.
There were four individuals who you consulted who advised you that you had the ability to not recuse yourself from this investigation. Isn't that correct?
Congressman, the regulations actually say
Four
that I have-
individuals advised you that you did not have to recuse yourself. Is that correct?
Congressman, let me be clear. It was
You're
my
not
decision
being
to
clear,
make,
sir,
and I
other
made
than
the decision.
in your obstruction and refusal to answer.
I'm not
my
obstructing
question.
anything. I'm answering your question.
Well, you are
I
obstructing.
consulted with a lot of people regarding my recusal, but it was my
Well, you're
decision.
not telling me who it was. Who did
followed
you
the
consult with?
As I mentioned, I consulted with
Name,
career ethics
name me
officials.
some names.
I consulted with my senior staff, and I consulted with the Office of Legal Counsel.
Name me some names, sir.
Well, one person would be the Assistant Attorney General for
What's
our
his
Office
name?
of Legal
Or her
Counsel.
name?
Steve Engel.
And who
He's
else?
a Senate-confirmed.
Who else did you consult with?
I also consulted with his principal deputy.
And that person's name is?
His name is Curtis Gannon.
And who else did you consult with, sir?
Congressman, I
I'm
don't
asking
think
you
the
a
public
pretty
exposure
clear
of these
question,
folks-
sir. Who else did you consult with about whether or not you should recuse yourself from the Mueller investigation?
Generally, who did I consult with?
I want to know specifically who you talked to.
Okay, well, I talked to Brad Weinsheimer, who is the senior career official at the Department of Justice.
And he advised you that your recusal was unnecessary, or did he advise you to recuse?
He actually could not identify any precedent for me to recuse. He said it was a close call. He said that, I'm sorry, did you have a question?
Go ahead.
Okay. He said that my other public statements did recognize the professionalism and competence of the special counsel. He said that out of an abundance of caution, that if asked, he would recommend a certain course. But again, did he
recognize that
he
you
also
recused
said that
yourself?
Time of the gentleman has expired.
Can I finish?
The witness may finish his answer.
Okay. He also said, Congressman, that the decision was mine to make based on the regulations of the Department of Justice, and I made that decision, and I stand by that decision.
Mr. Radcliffe.
Mr. Attorney General, I spent a number of years as a federal prosecutor, and because of that service, I have literally hundreds of friends at the Department of Justice right now and at its component agencies like the FBI, folks that I have tremendous respect for. And so I appreciate your stated desire earlier today to want to highlight their good work. And for the new members of the Judiciary Committee, an oversight hearing is typically where that would take place, where an Attorney General would give an accounting of the work of 115,000 men and women in the Justice Department and provide some idea of the vision with respect to the department's priorities like drug and human trafficking, preventing terrorism, reducing gun and gang violence. Now, earlier this week, my colleagues on the other side of the aisle indicated that they had a great desire to reduce gun violence in this country. In fact, we had an 8-hour hearing with 6 witnesses that talked about the need to reduce gun violence in this country. We started this hearing at 9:30 this morning. It's now 12:30 in the afternoon, and I haven't seen you field a single question from the other side of the aisle about any of the enforcement priorities of the Department of Justice. Despite the fact that you are the head of an organization that has a greater ability to impact and reduce gun violence than anyone or anything in the country. So I may be the only person today that wants to ask you a question about that, but I'm going to use the remainder of my time for that purpose. When I was at the Department of Justice, we had a very successful initiative called Project Safe Neighborhood. It was a program that took guns out of the hands of criminal offenders. It was a successful program that was killed by the Obama administration. The Obama Justice Department ended it. I understand that it has been reinstated during the Trump administration. I'd like you to inform us about its progress as well as any other measures or programs or enforcement priorities of the Department of Justice with respect to reducing gun violence in this country.
Thank you, Congressman. As you know, we served as United States attorneys together until you went into politics and I went into private practice. I want to talk specifically, and it's a really good question, about Project Safe Neighborhoods. In 2017, the Attorney General Sessions announced the expansion of Project Safe Neighborhoods, which encourages U.S. Attorneys' offices to work specifically with their unique communities they serve to develop a customized crime reduction strategy. One study showed that when you and I were doing PSN, it reduced crime overall by 4.1%, and with case studies showing reductions up to 42% of violent crime. We had the Project Safe Neighborhoods National Conference, as I mentioned in my opening statement, and I can tell you that especially in our largest cities, our 29 major cities, we are seeing a reduction of violent crime because of U.S. attorneys specifically working with their sheriffs and police chiefs and their federal and state and local partners in reducing gun violence. Some other things that we've done is the Attorney General was one of the 4 cabinet positions that were part of the School Safety Commission that came out with a report in the last several months that gave a practical outline as to how states especially could work to reduce gun violence, including the idea of the ERPOs. And there is, Congressman, I appreciate your tone that this oversight hearing is not a hearing about the types of things that we're talking about, but Congressman, the chairman sent me a letter specifically outlining things that he wanted to talk about, and I don't feel like we've talked about many of those things. So I'm glad that you offer that opportunity to talk about the Department of Justice efforts reducing gun violence.
Sorry, man, not a problem.
Thank you, Attorney General. I'd like to yield the remainder of my time to Congressman Jordan.
I appreciate the gentleman yielding. Mr. Whitaker, are there any other memos? Any other memos that Mr. Rosenstein has sent to Mr. Mueller that we don't know about, and if we did, would be redacted like the one that happened on August 2nd, 2017?
Congressman, as you know, the special counsel's investigation is ongoing, and it would be inappropriate for me to talk about any other memos related to that.
Well, Mr. Whitaker, we already know that there's been some modification of the broadest order I think you could have with this August 2nd, 2017 memo. And all I'm asking is, are there any other modifications, any other changes to the parameters of an investigation into the President of the United States?
The gentleman has expired. The witness may answer the question.
Congressman, just to be clear, the special counsel understands the scope of its investigation and is complying with all the regulations and orders related to that.
Thank you, Mr. Dykes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. General Whitaker, you and I are both lawyers. My first day of crim law, my professor came in and said, if someone asks you a yes or no question, don't just repeat the question, answer yes or no. Otherwise, during your career, people will think you're not a good lawyer. We know you're a good lawyer. Let's heed that advice going forward. In November 2018, we didn't. The advice is good nonetheless. In November 2018, Chris Wallace asked the president a question. He said, do you know before you appointed him that he, meaning you, had a record that was so critical of Robert Mueller? And the president said, I didn't know that. I didn't know that he took views on the Mueller investigation. Do you believe President Trump was telling the truth when he said that he just did not know that you were critical of Mueller before your appointment?
Congressman, the president...
I am going to go back to right now. I understand how it all worked. I'm just asking you, do you believe the president was telling the truth when he said he did not know that you had been critical of Robert Mueller before making your appointment?
Congressman, I have no reason to believe when I sit here today the president wasn't saying what he believed.
Who'd you interview with for the chief of staff job? Not for this job, for the chief of staff job.
It was General Sessions' decision to make. I interviewed with him, and he offered me the job.
And before you got the job, did you ever, before you took this job, did you ever speak with the president about the Mueller probe from May 17th, 2017 to September 22nd, 2017?
Are you saying about before I was actually the chief of staff?
I'm saying between May 17th,
well,
2017.
Congressman, I had never met the president until after I joined the Department of Justice.
So have you,
2017.
let me just ask you another question. You didn't communicate with him. Did you communicate with anyone at the White House about the special counsel investigation before September 22nd, 2018?
I assume you're excluding my appearances on CNN. Because I don't know who
if
at the
you-
White House was watching my
If you
appearances
talk to
on
anybody at the White House, I mean, you've told me that the president wasn't watching those, otherwise he would have been aware of your positions. So I assume the president wasn't watching. Did you talk about those appearances with anyone at the White House?
I did not talk about my appearances on
Did
CNN.
you talk about your views of the Mueller investigation with anyone at the White House?
I did not talk about my views of the Mueller investigation with any at the White House in this time period, essentially May of 2017, until I joined the Department of Justice in October of 2017.
And when you were, throughout that process, did you ever communicate with anyone? Here's the question, but by my count, you made 6 comments in op-eds, talk radio, or on cable news critical of the special counsel between the time you interviewed in June 2017 and the time you were hired as chief of staff to the Attorney General. Did you ever use any intermediaries? Did you have anyone, since the president didn't know, did you have anyone communicate with the White House or anyone at the White House, either staff members, friends, or others, to let them know exactly where you stood as expressed in at least those 6 public statements?
Congressman, I had at the time you described, May of 17 until I joined the department on October 4th of 2017. I didn't have a relationship with the White House.
Did you talk to any White House personnel before you were hired? Anyone at the White House?
Congressman,
That's an easy one. Did you talk to anyone at the White House? Is the answer no?
Congressman, I had previously been at the White House when I was a private citizen to talk about a different position.
No, I understand, but did you talk to anyone at the White House about your views on Mueller? Any personnel at the White House at all before you assumed the position?
In May,
Let me
between May of 7
let me just go forward, because here's the issue. When you became the Attorney General, since becoming the Attorney General, you said that you've been briefed on the special counsel. Did you use anyone else to have communications? Did you do anything to make sure that the White House might have learned some of what you learned in those briefings? Could it be that someone else on your staff might have spoken to someone at the White House, since you told us you didn't?
Congressman, I'm not aware of that happening.
Who else? How many people were in those briefings with you when you're briefed about the Mueller investigation?
Congressman, I'm not going to go into the specifics of the briefing, but it was a very limited group. There was only one member of my staff who was present with me.
And have you ever attempted to use any intermediaries to get information to the president or others on his staff?
No, I have not attempted to use any intermediaries to get information to the president.
So I'll close, Mr. Chairman, just by saying this is going to be a long hearing. We're going to go on for a while. The concern that we have, Mr. Whitaker, is that there was no Senate confirmation here. We're not the Senate. But the administration justified their decision in picking you under the Vacancies Reform Act. There was a law on the books for the Attorney General's succession and the authority to oversee the special counsel's work. It goes from one Senate confirmed official to another, from the AG, Deputy AG, Associate Attorney AG, Solicitor General, Assistant Attorney General, the Attorney General in charge of the Office of Legal Counsel, Assistant AG for National Security, Assistant AG in charge of the Criminal Division, and on and on and on. None of them are the Chief of Staff to the Attorney General. I think what we're trying to figure out is, why is it exactly that the president chose to go beyond the statute and choose you? And I hope over the balance of this hearing that'll become clear. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Congressman. I believe the president chose me to be the acting Attorney General for a couple of reasons. First, I had served previously in the department as the United States Attorney, which is a very important position, as Mr. Radcliffe previously stated, and in the administration of justice. And for 13 months, I was the Chief of Staff for Attorney General Sessions, and I had done the full year with him side by side. Obviously, he made the decisions, but I gave him advice and counsel, and I was aware of everything that was going on at the Department of Justice that General Sessions wasn't recused from. And so I think the president was comfortable that to continue the momentum at the Department of Justice that we had established in addressing these important priority issues like reducing violent crime, combating the opioid crisis, and others, that the president felt I was best positioned to do the duties of Attorney General.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I'll just say to Mr. Whitaker, my questions normally in a normal oversight committee would be vastly different than the direction I'm going to go because we've kind of wandered into this other stream over here. So I'm going to ask you some questions. Is the longstanding constitutionally based Department of Justice policy holds that a sitting president cannot be indicted. Is that, and that's based on the last review which happened during the Clinton administration, is that still in effect or has it changed?
That is still the policy of the Department of Justice.
Have you spoken to Deputy Attorney General Rosenstein about his statements on invoking the 25th Amendment and wiretapping President Trump?
I have seen the statements by Deputy Rosenstein that he made to the press regarding those statements, and I have no reason to believe that he did not, that those statements, were consistent with what he believed at the time.
Okay, I'm not sure I understood that. You said no reason to believe that they were not consistent. So there are a couple of negatives there. Do you believe they were consistent to what he believed at the time?
I do. I believe what Deputy Attorney General Rosenstein said to the press when it was first reported about his discussion.
Oh, you're talking about his comments, not his comments to the press, not the ones about him wearing a wire.
I'm talking about Deputy Attorney General Rosenstein's comments to the press after it was reported that he had considered
So his
wearing a wire
responses,
and invoking the 25th Amendment.
I didn't mean to interrupt, but his responses then you think are consistent. So did you talk to him about this issue at all?
I'm not here to talk about the internal discussions that I have with the.
But this is really critical. It's not, with all due respect, this is not an ongoing, this has nothing to do with an ongoing investigation. What it has got to do with is Mr. Rosenstein and his role as an unbiased overseer of the Mueller investigation. So it's not directly dealing with the investigation, but it deals with his capacity to be unbiased. So I'm not asking whether, I'm not trying to get into the substance or even the periphery. I want to know, though, did you have a conversation with Mr. Rosenstein about his comments as reported?
Congressman, this is an important question to you, but I'm not going to answer my conversations with Deputy Attorney General Rosenstein. I believe that they are deliberative. Obviously, I'm exercising the full responsibilities of the acting Attorney General position.
I appreciate that. I appreciate it. I know that that answer is important to you. I know that's important to you. But the answering in a way that we as the American people can understand, that's important to us. So let's get to June 21st, 2017, where you said the truth is there was no collusion with the Russians in the Trump campaign. There was interference by the Russians into the election, but there was not collusion with the campaign. That's where the left seems to be combining these two issues. The last thing they want right now is the truth to come out. And the fact that there's not a single piece of evidence that demonstrates that the Trump campaign had any illegal or even improper relationships with the Russians. It's that simple. Do you still adhere to that statement? Is that still true in your mind today?
Congressman, as I mentioned before to previous questioning about my statements as a private citizen before I joined the Department of Justice, those were made based on publicly available information, and I had no inside information. I did not know the details of the investigation. I obviously know the traditions of the Department of Justice, the rules and regulations, and I'm going to continue to follow those as I exercise the duties.
I remember the answers that you gave to other similar questions, but not this question here. And so that's not what I'm asking. What I'm asking is, as we sit here today, a year and a half later, has your opinion changed from what you stated June 21st, 2017? Has it changed? That's a simple question. That's not hard.
Congressman, the special counsel's investigation is an ongoing investigation, and I'm not going to characterize that investigation or give you my opinion of that investigation as I sit here today.
So the scope memo indicates that the scope of the Mueller investigation was any links and or coordination between the Russian government and individuals associated with the campaign of President Donald Trump, and two, any matters that arose or may arise directly from that investigation. Has that scope been expanded in any way?
Congressman, as I was discussing with Representative Jordan, I am not going to talk about the scope of the special counsel's.
All right, then I'll go forward then and say the indictments and the relation to scope one: Papadopoulos for false statements occurring after Mueller was appointed, Manafort for acts unrelated to the election or campaign, Gates acts unrelated to the election or the campaign, Flynn false statements about post-election conversations, Richard Pinetto unrelated to campaign or election, Cohen referred by Mueller to Southern District of New York because it was out of his scope Sam Patton, not related to the 2016 election or campaign, and Stone for false statements occurring after Mueller was appointed. Not one indictment alleged an illegal relationship between a member of the Trump campaign and Russia. And that's consistent with what we've seen so far. And with that, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Acting AG, I actually wanted to ask you some questions regarding what you did prior to being Acting AG. It's my understanding that before you moved to the Department of Justice, that you were the Executive Director of the Foundation for Accountability and Civic and Trust.
Mr. Chairman, I have a point of order. Mr. Chairman.
Mr.
Chairman, I have
fact
a
is
point
a
of order.
conservative ethics watchdog
I have a point
where
of
he
order.
made full use of the opportunity to call for
Gentleman will state his
investigations
point.
of
The
multiple
gentlelady will
Democrats.
suspend. The gentleman will state his point of order.
My point of order by the very statement from the gentlelady is outside the scope of an oversight investigative hearing on the Department of Justice.
It is not. You need to
That
let
is
me
not-
finish my question, and you'll see what I was
The
asking.
gentlelady will suspend. That is not a valid point of order. The gentlelady will continue.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, I make a point of order, Rule pursuant 10 of the House rules, that the question is outside the scope of...
The gentlelady has the floor.
Mr. Are you just going to overrun a point of order?
Yeah, because you're...
Gentlelady will
state my point of order. Are we just
The
gonna-
gentlelady will suspend. I ruled that it was not a valid point of order, and the gentlelady has the floor. The gentlelady will continue.
Thank you.
I was not through with
So
my
you-
point of order.
The gentlelady will continue.
Fill the ruling of the chair.
Move to table.
I move to table.
Motion to table the appeal of the ruling of the chair is before the committee. Motion to table is not debatable. The clerk will call the roll. One moment while we set up the clerk. Wait, slow down.
Mr. Chairman, may I make a unanimous consent request while we're waiting for this vote? No. Karen, since when is the bias of a witness not relevant to anything?
He was on the advisory board.
I was going to...
Found that to be a fraudulent.
Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman votes aye. Ms. Lofgren. Ms. Jackson-Lee. Ms. Jackson-Lee votes aye. Mr. Cohen. Mr. Cohen votes aye. Mr. Johnson. Mr. Deutsch. Mr. Deutsch votes aye. Ms. Bass. Ms. Bass votes aye. Mr. Richmond. Mr. Richmond votes aye. Mr.
I'm
Jeffries.
John King in Washington. You're watching the House Judiciary Committee take a vote on a procedural dispute between the Democrats and the Republicans. In the witness chair, the acting Attorney General Matthew Whitaker. Democratic member of the committee was about to ask Whitaker about prior activities with organizations before he joined the Justice Department. Republicans trying to argue that should be outside the scope of today's committee hearing. That is that is the question, but B, it is part of the broader contention between the Democrats and Republicans. We're watching the roll call vote. The question of Mr. Whitaker will continue after this vote. Democrats have the votes on the committee to win. The procedure requires them to take this vote, which is just, this has almost nothing. This vote has very little to do with the substance at hand, but it has everything to do with the partisanship at hand.
Yeah, absolutely. And we've been remarking on this as we've been watching that the one thing that has not changed with the new Congress is the divisiveness. And I guess in one way you would expect it, because Republicans are nervous about Democrats being in charge, but Democrats are also, many of them are being as partisan as they were in the minority. We're not getting a whole lot new that we didn't know before, but we are getting some things new that we didn't know before, starting earlier in the day. Just even something basic, like he said, and he said this several times, that he did not deny any funds to Robert Mueller. That's something that we didn't know yet only because we didn't, or at least officially, only because we didn't have the opportunity to hear from him under oath as we are today.
Right. He said he hasn't denied any funds to Mr. Mueller. He said he has in no way interfered with Mr. Mueller.
Right.
He said he has not communicated to the president or any officials at the White House about things he has learned about the Mueller investigation. So if you want to bottle all that up, the Democrats are suspicious. They want to know why the president picked the chief of staff to Jeff Sessions to replace Jeff Sessions when he fired him. They're suspicious because of the president's constant attacks on Jeff Sessions and the Justice Department and the investigation. But anyone at the table, please jump in. Well, roll call vote's just about done. He has said nothing to give the Democrats any information, anything to advance their suspicions of him, if you will. Correct?
Yeah, no, that's absolutely right. That doesn't mean that even him saying there clearly in the hearing that he has not spoken to the president about the Mueller probe is allaying those suspicions. What I'm surprised hasn't been brought up yet is the SDNY probe, and I know we're listening closely to see if they're back in session, but.
To that part has been interesting. Let's get back to the hearing. Karen Bass, Democrat of California, now asking her.